At last, it's time for a spoiler review of Spider-Man Brand New Day. This comes off the heels of seeing the movie again a second time this past weekend, which I did on Friday. As is the case with a lot of the spoiler reviews I've done in the past, this is going to be an unscripted, somewhat rambling review of the movie, except with deep spoilers, the kind of stuff you can't get into for a non-spoiler review. Just hitting the main points in somewhat chronological order in a deep dive and all the need to knows about the movie and kind of express the stuff I couldn't go into in my spoiler free review. As I said, I saw this movie again this past Friday for a second time, which this movie made like 145 million in its second weekend. Already it's at like 655 million in the US, worldwide 1.6 billion. So this movie's just doing crazy business. It's going to be one of the few movies in the history of movies to make 2 billion in worldwide. That's all but a guarantee at this point. So just unbelievable numbers. Just shows the popularity and how Spider-Man just appeals to anyone, and how this movie was anticipated yet speaking a lot to people, because a movie to do that kind of money in second weekend shows that it's speaking to a lot of people. A lot of people wanted to go and experience it again. I wanted to make sure I saw it again the second weekend because for me, I love seeing movies with a big crowd. Obviously, that opening weekend experience is something else. But even the second weekend can be fun because, you're still getting big crowds, especially for movies that do mega money like Endgame, No Way Home, Deadpool and Wolverine, stuff like that. Although the thing you can tell with watching a movie a big movie like this and its second weekend is that you can tell based on the reactions that the crowd that you're seeing it with has probably seen the movie before. It's not getting those same kind of reactions from an opening night kind of crowd. Those kind of reactions are just special when you see a movie like on this scale on a Thursday, Friday, or any time on the opening weekend. It's just unbelievably special. You don't quite get that on its second weekend, and you can tell that with some of the major points of the movie, or when Sadie Sink's character is finally revealed. Hell, it's a spoiler review. Jean Grey is revealed in terms of the name. That kind of thing. But that doesn't mean it's still not fun to experience the movie again. And in fact, to be honest, sometimes watching a movie for a second time can be my favorite experience watching a movie, because your kind of expectations are kind of out the door when it comes to what you're expecting to see. You know what the movie has, and you're more just sort of appreciating it as a film rather than just your mind wandering in terms of what's really gonna happen throughout the movie. So with this movie, and finally getting into the need to knows about the story and all that, with this movie, I gotta say, I absolutely loved the first third of it, basically. I mean, it was just the perfect balance of your Spider-Man stuff and your Peter Parker stuff working in perfect harmony. I just thought the Spider-Man stuff initially was just so awesome. That initial montage that we saw when he was fighting some of your lesser known villains, kind of recreating classic comic book covers. That was a really cool, nice touch where you see him fight Tombstone, Boomerang, Tarantula. So some of these guys are not household Spider-Man villain names. Scorpion, who is, more of, I don't want to say he's like a huge villain, but it was kind of weird that they kind of relegated him to kind of a montage style villain, even though he did get to come back for a decent battle later on. So it was kind of a step up from the other ones. But again, recreating those classic comic book covers was very nice. And something that just absolutely blew me away from the jump was the Spider-Man suit. Oh my God, the suit just looked unbelievable. As I said in the original review, you're just getting kind of your classic basic Spider-Man look, but it just looked amazing on the big screen. It's very similar to the suit scene at the end of No Way Home, that homemade suit he makes after the spell that you see him swing through in the snow during Christmas time at the end. But with that suit, even though I liked the basic look of it in terms of, the design and all that, one thing I did not like was how shiny the blue was. The blue was just way too shiny. Here, they obviously toned that down, and just everything all around looked a lot better. It's actually the perfect hybrid of the amazing Spider-Man suit from the Andrew Garfield films and the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire suit. When it came to, it had some of your, I guess, like your structure patterns from the Amazing Spider-Man in terms of how the back, some stuff like that, kind of, just some stuff here and there in terms of that basic structure. But then from the Tobey Maguire suit, what I noticed is that it had kind of the pattern that you would see on the actual cloth, this weird kind of don't know if it's a hexagon design, whatever it was, but when you saw it up close, you noticed what the pattern was, and that was straight out of the Sam Raimi suit. So that was a cool hybrid, but overall, the suit just looked unbelievable. And just that opening Spider-Man action was just so cool. Whether it was the montage fighting some of your lesser-known villains, the stuff with the Punisher, and just the big action sequence with the tank, that stuff was amazing. But then I thought it was beautifully balanced with the stuff of showing Peter's struggle. One of the best things that No Way Home did was that it finally set up the street level friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that I think a lot of Spider-Man fans were hoping to see after your initial stuff. Most of your home trilogy was more of a big scale Avengers type stuff that wasn't really your friendly neighborhood kind of stuff. I mean, obviously he did. They were more friendly neighborhood than they're given credit for when he's fighting. Vulture wasn't like a big threat, but stuff like battling these mega threats in Europe, or obviously your multiverse shenanigans, are bigger than what you would expect from a Spider-Man adventure. But I think it was a nice change in pace that you got things that were a little smaller in scale. But with that comes showing in terms of Peter's struggle, him just kind of being on his own, living this life of responsibility where he's got to make sacrifice in terms of how he lives his day, how he lives alone, and obviously when you combine that with the stuff from No Way Home, how that ended with his friends, it's a real struggle. To where I think this movie, when it came to balancing Peter's struggle and then the cool, fun, crime-fighting stuff of being Spider-Man, I thought it was the perfect balance of two of the best elements from the two previous Spider-Man series, where it perfectly balanced having your Peter Parker struggle, which we saw in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man film, specifically Spider-Man 2, and just the pure web-slinging fun of the Amazing Spider-Man suit. That initial stuff in the movie, all of it, of Spider-Man stuff, it reminded me, it was just an even better version of the really cool Spidey stuff we saw in the first third-ish of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, where we got to see a montage of that Spider-Man fighting crime, being awesome, doing cool stuff and saving the day, just showing that being Spider-Man is really awesome. And that was just all around really cool here. Another thing that was amazing to see, that was the first time that we've seen Spider-Man, like this Spider-Man really just for a lot of the movie, just in pure like Spider-Man mode, being that, not vigilante superhero that the New York's finest rely on, and how New York City adopts as one of their own. That was really cool to see when his teamwork with Officer Jean DeWolf, nice pulling her from the comics, stuff working with damage control, just being the hero that people rely on, rather than, kind of your Avengers type stuff seen in the previous home trilogy. I don't want to bag on those films because I actually really like them. But again, it was nicely more so pure Spider-Man that you got to see in this movie. Like I said, perfect balance between the struggle of the Sam Raimi films, but this personal struggle, and then the fun of the, believe it or not, Amazing Spider-Man 2. All that stuff is really cool, to where the pathos and what you feel for Peter when you see how he's feeling about not being able to, just kind of reluctant to talk to his friends who have forgotten about him, missing his girlfriend, missing his best friend. That stuff was really cool. It made him someone definitely worth rooting for, that you felt bad for. The stuff when it came to the mutation, now that was interesting. That initial scene was obviously pretty eye-opening when he's kind of, webbing like an actual spider and hanging himself to a rooftop, almost like a caterpillar coming out of a cocoon and turning into a butterfly, whatever that was supposed to be. And I like that when he's kind of testing out the organic webs, I knew he's like, they're definitely going to name drop or reference, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, which he did, saying Peter 2 was cool, so that was nice. That whole scene of testing out the webs, I kind of like how they made the webs, organic webs. When you really think about it, they never really went into this in the Sam Raimi films. It's a pretty disgusting thing when you see them kind of oozing out of the slit on his wrist. That was pretty disgusting. It was amazing how they show how much more powerful these organic webs are. It definitely made me feel bad for Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, because now not only has he not fought an alien like the other two Spideys, he also doesn't have organic webs, so he's got to rely on the whole thing of just making them in the lab. And as he said, it's a pretty big hassle. One really cool thing though, so when he was first doing the web sling with the organic webs, the music was so damn good. That song, I had to look it up. I think it was like a Bad Bunny song or something like that. And it wasn't like it was playing a lot of lyrics, it was just that beat was so good. And this movie had some great needle drop type moments where the song that went in the background was so damn good. The opening scene where he's fighting, when it's showing kind of the montage, that scene was just, or the music was just so perfect to go with that. And then another song that played, Loser, when he's kind of on the subway, kind of being, almost a loser as he's kind of a guy by himself. That song was really good. I think the first song that played it's a song called, I'm looking up on my playlist right now. It's called Wolf Like Me. Again, that song was really good for that opening montage. The Loser song was really good when it's him kind of alone and it was playing at the party. And then, what was the last song? Oh, it's not a bad... Well, I think it is. At least this remix I have on Spotify. It's a song called EOO, whatever it was. And yeah, it is a Bad Bunny song. But that remix that was playing when he was swinging, that was just really good. I really enjoyed that. So the music was great. So all of that kind of led to the scene. Well, actually, I should get back to it. So the mutation... I was wondering, based on the trailers, if the movie was gonna kind of go in this direction, which is, if you know anything about mutation when it comes to Spider-Man, I'm not talking about X-Men stuff. I'm talking about when Spider-Man mutated, and in the comics, you remember the 90s cartoon series, where he got like extra actual limbs, like an actual spider, like an extra pair of arms. I think it was like 4 extra arms that grew out of his side and eventually turned into Man Spider. It would have been a pretty bold choice to go in that direction here. But, you kind of thought, especially when they say he was becoming more arachnid-like, but I just don't know if there was time for that in this movie. The whole mutation thing, I think it was just kind of a method for the movie to go in the direction it wanted to when it came to the inhibitor and just kind of interactions with Bruce Banner, that kind of stuff. The organic webs thing, I got to be honest, I actually do prefer the using the mechanical web shooters. I just think it lends to Spidey, having to be more resourceful, getting to be, more creative when it comes to gadgets, that kind of thing. The organic webs, I mean, whatever. Like I said, Peter 2 was cool, but I just kind of prefer the mechanical web shooters route. But based on where this movie went at the end, I guess he won't really be going with the full-on mechanical web shooters. Maybe he can have something on the side that he can use as like a web grenade. That would be pretty cool. But as the movie showed, these organic webs are pretty damn strong. So it doesn't look like he's going to be going back to any traditional web shooters anytime soon. So leading into that stuff, that kind of gets into your big threat, if you will. And that comes when we see Miss Telepath doing her thing. Which that whole thing of showing the hopping was, pretty cool in this movie, even though it's one of the worst kept secrets about this movie when it came to Jean Grey. There was leaks about this months ago, but it's still not official until it's actually official. I guess it's really just kind of tough to keep all this stuff under wraps. It's going to get out somehow. But, the telepathic threat was cool, and you just feeling that sense of danger. Like, this is a person that can be anywhere. What we saw in the beginning of the movie when it came to manipulating others, the whole hopping thing, that was like, for someone, if you were able to be in the dark and didn't really know what the threat was going into this movie in terms of Jean Grey, it would make you wonder, like, what the heck is going on here? But that whole stuff initially was, pretty nice in showcasing that and her threat. And watching the movie, when it finally, the name did pop up, that she's Jean Grey, especially watching it on opening weekend, even though I'm pretty sure a lot of the audience knew that was Jean Grey just based on the leaks, it was still a pretty nice moment and got a big cheer. People saying, finally, after all this damn secrecy, we finally have the straight up answer from the actual movie itself. Now, I'll get more into the Jean Grey stuff later, but it was a cool reveal, and just the initial stuff of the hopping, telepathic ability, it did make for a very nice threat, because I actually don't think that any of Spidey's villains have any kind of real telepathic abilities. So it added a unique dynamic not seen in Spider-Man movies. And this telepathic threat led to what might have been, if you don't count any of your pure action type moments or whatever, probably the most like whoa scene in the movie, the scene with MJ on the rooftop. That scene was absolutely incredible, and how it played on everyone's emotions in the movie. All of your characters in the movie and everyone in the audience. Oh my goodness. Because you legit thought from the dialogue that this was when MJ is saying, putting the pieces together and telling Peter to Spider-Man to take off the mask, and thinking that the kissing, and then that would, awaken the spell or make her remember. legit, everyone believed it in the actual, not only Peter believed it, everyone believed it in the actual auditorium, and everyone clapped because it was actually a very touching moment. The emotions seen from MJ, the beautiful emotions from Peter saying he missed her so much. Oh my goodness, that was such a feel good moment. Until obviously it gets revealed that Jean Grey was manipulating MJ. Now, how the real question is how the hell Jean was able to telepathically escape whatever that helicopter dude that she was trapped in, way above on that construction crane. That's a different story, but whatever. It didn't the moment is still what counts, and that whole moment was just whoa. It just got everybody, and then this emotion scene from Peter afterwards. It was like, yeah, he's right. That moment, that was pretty unforgivable to do some stuff like that. That whole scene is just really impressive. It's just amazing in the emotions. Even though it's kind of gets into the whole thing that you've seen of people calling it rape, which it kind of is in terms of making MJ mentally do something against her will, to where the movie basically treats it as rape in the dialogue that Peter had with MJ later in the apartment, saying, hey, look, I know I kissed you. I thought it was you. I know, but it turned out to be Jean. He's sorry. And that was a conversation as if it was something like, actual rape or whatever. So it was a pretty dark direction for Spider-Man movie to lean into that kind of, thinking or whatever. So that whole scene was incredible. But when she jumped off the rooftop and was falling down, man, I think everyone in that auditorium, everyone watching the movie, you know how you're feeling. You were clutching your seat thinking, oh my goodness. Because anytime you see, that was really feeling like Amazing Spider-Man 2 type things, where everyone knows that when a Spider Girl's falling, ooh boy, he better catch her. Otherwise, it's going to lead to some real heartbreak. And just the imagery and the way it was shot was almost straight out of Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, oh my God, that scene was probably the most tension I felt during the movie. It would have been definitely pretty ballsy for them to kill her in that moment, but you just felt it like, oh my goodness. I was blown away with the entire scene. And then just when he catches her, and again, just the camera shots of him holding her straight out of the end of the Gwen Stacy death in Amazing Spider-Man 2. So they really made everyone, myself included, feel something big time with that whole sequence, whether it was the emotions being played with, the kiss, the reveal, and the fall. That whole scene was just incredible. Probably just the best pure scene in the movie. Definitely your best non-action scene. I mean, that scene was just absolutely fantastic. So with that kind of leads into a real integration when Spider-Man enlists the Punisher for help in keeping MJ safe. Now, when it was initially announced that the Punisher was going to be in this movie, I was like, how the hell are you going to have Jon Bernthal's unhinged, psycho, R-rated Punisher in a family-friendly Spider-Man movie? It just seemed, even though the Punisher was introduced in Spider-Man comics, that made it kind of cool that he was going to actually appear in a movie. Just the tone of the Netflix show and the other stuff that he's appeared on Disney Plus, which was pretty hardcore. This made it seem like, I don't know how this is going to fit right here. Well, they definitely made it a PG-13 Punisher in terms of, amazingly, you don't actually see him gun down or kill anybody. We see him using weapons and stuff like that, and he's got kind of that gruff personality, but doesn't kill anyone, even though he still has that ideology when he says he's not afraid to put a bullet in someone and that kind of thing. So at least has that ideology, but amazingly, you don't see him kill anyone, which, for a Spider-Man movie, it's probably not appropriate to go in that direction, even though we've seen superhero movies can go pretty hardcore when it comes to your violence and that kind of thing. I just think for a Spider-Man movie, you don't really need to bring things into that direction. It's not really appropriate, even for someone like the Punisher, amazingly. But I think they did a great job with a PG-13 Punisher here in terms of Jon Bernthal's version, in terms of, making him still rugged, whatever, but it's not like anything hardcore, rated R or whatever. Although I was amazed how, you don't hear any F-bombs. I don't think you'll ever hear a pure F-bomb in a Spider-Man movie, even though they've teased it here and there. But man, he said the word shit a whole lot in this movie, to where I thought, oh man, any parent bringing the kids, it's gonna be the most time they've ever heard that word in their young life. So he was just saying it left and right, to where I was kind of amazed by that. But him and Spider-Man, they had just amazing, chemistry in terms of how they just made this dynamic work in terms of Spidey being you're kind of a naive kid crime fighter, and the Punisher, grizzled veteran, that kind of thing. But that dynamic was a really cool clash between the two. It was just really funny. You never would have thought that Spidey and Punisher would be a fun comedic, almost somewhat a Deadpool and Wolverine type duo. But those guys were a great pair together. I absolutely loved them, and I thought it was actually it's actually pretty interesting to when I hear that a lot of my friends or people that I've talked to at work say they actually have not seen the Punisher, series on Netflix or the new stuff on Disney Plus at all. So it kind of makes me amazed to think that, people who watch this version, this movie, and see the Punisher, oh, it's kind of, he's hardcore, but he's a fun guy. He's actually a funny guy. I want to watch the Netflix show. You watch that show and you'd be like, whoa, this is nothing like the movie at all in terms of, that tone. Because in that series, he's a really kind of serious, borderline psycho guy. And they, really did tone it down. I would think appropriately for the movie. And I thought you got enough. I think it was the best of both worlds everywhere in terms of that kind of thing. So I liked that dynamic, his hideaway, the conversations with Spider-Man, leading eventually to the fights with the Hulk in the building. Hulk was something, when it showed that Savage Hulk was going to be in this movie, and then when it actually happened in the film, the sequence, oh my goodness, did everyone get excited. Just because it was amazingly, the first real Savage Hulk action since Thor Ragnarok. We did see him for a little bit in the beginning of Endgame. That didn't last long. Just, a brief time-traveling appearance when they went to the first Avengers segment in Endgame. It wasn't really any real Savage Hulk action. So I think everyone was just amazed to see that. And it's really cool that they give Spidey all of these different Avengers to play off of in these Marvel, in these Tom Holland movies. How he's Iron Man, he fought Doctor Strange, and now he gets to fight with the Hulk. Which that whole sequence, oh my, the fight was great. It was amazing. It was so cool how the Punisher got involved. Again, watching that grounded, gritty Netflix series, I never would have thought you'd see that version of the Punisher fighting the Hulk. But that was all really cool, just that fight. The only thing I actually wish it went a little bit longer. I felt like it could have gone on for another, minute or two before it would have started to feel overdone. But all the action, the thunderclap, the camera angles, all that was really cool. All of this should be mentioned, obviously done for Jean Grey in terms of her manipulation of the Hulk to get into the damage control, VMAX, and all that kind of stuff. Because this is really when you get to this part of the movie, Jean Grey is cemented as kind of your main story focus of the movie. All the other stuff, your smaller villains and stuff like that didn't end up being so important. I think a lot of, I saw reactions from the movie that people were disappointed with the role that some of those guys played when it came to Tombstone, Scorpion, and all that. I'm like, you could tell from the trailers that was not going to be a big part of the movie at all. Even Scorpion, which, he's one of the last of the core classic Spider-Man villains to get the live action treatment. All of them have appeared in either the, traditional Spider-Man movies, and Craven had his own real crappy movie a couple years ago. So Scorpion was the last one, but, they didn't make him a main threat by any means. It's cool that they were able to pay off what was teased in Homecoming, but he didn't even get a origin or how he got that suit. Nothing. The look was decent, I guess, but even then, not even having a helmet or something like that. As Scorpion, whatever. Kind of, I guess it just showed he's not really thought of that caliber of Spider-Man villain. But obviously what was considered to be the villain is Jean Grey. And, I think once you get to this part, after your Hulk action, your core Punisher Spider-Man team up, that kind of thing, when Jean Grey takes over, this is where the movie, it's hard to describe. It's when it was starting to lose me a little bit. When I say lose me, I just became very confused and surprised. I was like, wow, they're actually going in this direction for a Spider-Man movie, making Jean Grey your main villain. And I, still all this time later, I'm still not exactly crazy about it. Just when I think of, the kind of rogues gallery that Spider-Man has and some of the villains and possibilities you can use, this whole thing with Jean Grey, especially for the second half of the movie, really feels more so like her movie, which is, to be honest, kind of inappropriate for a Spider-Man movie. And I think an issue that's actually come up now, and this was kind of apparent, not so apparent, but you thought of this with No Way Home, is that I think an issue is that some of those other villains that we saw in No Way Home, the ones from previous Spider-Man, non MCU Spider-Man movies, and Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Electro, Lizard and Sandman. I think an issue is that you might probably won't see an MCU variant of these guys. And to be honest, not to have an MCU version of Green Goblin and Doc Ock is kind of crazy to me. Those are like Spider Man's real, I'd say, core villains, even more so than Venom. Those are the ones that you really think of when it comes to Spider Man. Green Goblin for the personal struggle and the trauma he causes them, and Doc Ock really being kind of the leader of your other superpowered villains that you see him throughout the Spider-Man series, the leader of the Sinister Six and all that, the kind of scientific genius and that havoc he wreaks for that. I just think that it's kind of an issue that they have to really kind of improvise now in terms of whatever they're going to do for future Spider-Man movies and all that kind of thing, to where they go in this direction and have Jean Grey as your villain. And I'm just like, that didn't really feel like Spider-Man to me. Even if the initial part of this movie was doing an amazing job in that kind of stuff, I just don't love it in terms of a direction for a Spider-Man movie. It just feels weird, especially when you think about just the Homecoming trilogy, the great job they did with the Spider-Man villains, whether the ones native to the MCU with Vulture and Mysterio, or just the good use of the ones from the previous non-MCU Spider-Man movies. It's kind of amazing how you went from No Way Home having basically a full-on classic, Spider-Man Sinister Six, and then you get to this movie and it's really kind of the opposite, not really a traditional Spider-Man threat in that kind of way. So even later, I'm still a bit disappointed by that one. Before you get into the actual third act, definitely your major scene in the movie is kind of what really comes about of Peter and MJ's relationship when Peter accidentally leaves the letter behind in Punisher's warehouse or hideout, and then MJ discovers it and sees that he's, what exactly happened with the spell at the end of No Way Home to make everyone forget about Peter Parker. That whole dialogue definitely felt real, though. Even though, you're rooting for the two to get together, MJ doesn't have any memories of Peter. And so it kind of made sense that, that she said, look, I appreciate all this, but I don't love you. It definitely hurt, but you couldn't really blame her for that. I just thought those scenes all around between, Peter and MJ, Tom Holland and Zendaya, those guys were so amazing in those scenes in the movie, and just kind of all around, it really makes you feel something. You really invested in that relationship in terms of where things are going, and just made things so awkward, and you felt bad for Peter, how, she discovered his secret, and just like, this is, it's kind of weird, even more awkward when she asked for a swing home, which when watching the movie, when he was swinging her home, I was like, those are some angry swings because of holding on to her. He had to use one hand, but it was not kind of your smooth, graceful Spider-Man swings. It was kind of an aggressive, I'm really mad. But it was really unexpected when she invited him up to say hi to Ned and meet him. And that whole scene of those three together, even though he was still being Spider-Man, that was still a really cool, touching scene, especially when he says, this is the most fun I've had in years. So it just makes you miss, like, oh man, it sucks we couldn't have more of this, not having that kind of full dynamic in this movie, but it really made you miss it when you see that scene in the movie, just kind of missing those three be together. It was a very nice scene. It was very, very cool to see. But that's what eventually leads into the third act, your main kind of climax, which takes place in the prison. It's funny when everyone, including me, saw the trailer of Spider-Man fighting the Hand in the prison and thinking, oh, this is leading into Daredevil, especially with how Daredevil season 2 ends with Matt Murdock in jail, and the trailers and stuff like that, where they were basically reverse misdirection in terms of the No Way Home trailers, in terms of that shot that everyone looked at in the trailer of Spider-Man jumping from the building, fighting the Hand, thinking, ooh, who are the other heroes that are going to be in this scene? Nothing. And I thought for sure from the trailer that prison stuff was going to be leading into Daredevil, and there's no mention of Daredevil, which I actually think was a big missed opportunity for, especially when Punisher was mocking Spider-Man for wearing the mask even when drinking coffee. I thought that would have been a great moment to just, to mention Daredevil or at least allude to him, but nothing. So that was a big missed opportunity right there, not to have that. Even though, from my understanding, this movie takes place, a little bit of time, decent amount of time after Daredevil season 2. But still, though, you could have mentioned him a little bit. That was a big missed opportunity right there. But back to the climax. Again, this climax that takes place in this prison, Jean Grey being tested on, but eventually breaking free and making these ninjas fight Spider-Man. It just didn't feel like a Spider-Man climax to me. I'm sorry in terms of your main threat, most of your focus being on Jean, just the weird messagings all around. It didn't really do it for me. And then the mutation thing, I mean, it was cool showing how powerful the organic webs were, but did I think it was a great payoff for the whole mutation storyline? For Peter, no, but I guess it led to the whole inhibitor thing being built, so whatever when it came to that. I didn't get much out of that storyline. I thought it was, nice though, how he uses the core memory of Aunt May to, calm Jean down and make her realize, a life of responsibility or just understanding your power, that kind of thing. That was cool. Although it doesn't really forgive all the big crimes she did, man. Forget about just raping MJ, which is very vile and disgusting. But when it showed in that flashback what these mutants can do, you can understand why the world would be afraid of them in terms of just violating people's rights, just kind of uncontrolled power, that kind of thing. But in terms of our actual crimes, you remember when I watched the movie the second time, I was like, gee, flat out probably killed someone when she made that one guy go and get hit by a taxi, which even Spider-Man, I guess, didn't really care about that. They never really showed what happened to that guy. Maybe he survived, but he's going to be in some big-time medical care for a long time. So that was bad. Making MJ, forget about just the rape, but jumping off the building, and it came pretty close to killing her. That was, again, a very disturbing scene. Just all the stuff she did, making the Hulk go on that, brief rampage. I'm not sure if he actually killed someone, but still, it was sad for the Hulk, or Bruce Banner, who had control over the Hulk for years, and all of a sudden, she's the one that makes him have this violent episode of Savage Hulk coming back. So the fact that there weren't really any consequences for her, I think is something that will be addressed in whatever the full to be announced full X-Men reboot film within the MCU is going to be, just kind of how the public feels about mutants and just what they can do. And if anything, even if I didn't think this direction of Jean Grey and mutants or whatever was appropriate for a Spider-Man movie, was a nice setup for, how the public in the MCU would feel about mutants, setting up that dynamic of how we need a way for them to be controlled and we should be afraid of them. So it was a nice setup in that aspect, even though I don't think it was the best thing that I would want to see in a Spider-Man movie. But, the whole climax, it definitely was not as big or bombastic as any of the climaxes. Well, I mean, I guess Homecoming didn't have that big a climax, but definitely nowhere near as big as Far From Home or No Way Home. Those had amazing big climaxes, but were still, I don't know, I just still enjoyed those more, even though, the action scene with the hand was decent. This climax, I could keep rambling about this, but I don't know, it just kind of lost me a bit. I didn't love it. Now, what I really did not love was the hospital thing. So, Punisher accidentally shoots Spider-Man and trying to kill Jean Grey, so he feels bad. How the hell he got to that island to pick up Peter and bring him to the hospital, whatever. But I just thought the writing for this whole thing in terms of bringing Spider-Man and the Punisher to get into a hospital, having doctors care for Spider-Man, I just thought, it's ridiculous enough, all the scenes in this movie where Frank Castle's just roaming about the streets, not getting arrested, whatever, fine. We didn't see any cops in the immediate vicinity in some of these scenes or whatever, so maybe he got away or whatever. You see the scene where where Jean's using her mind thing to, freeze New York, which this movie brought up another thing. Why the hell would anyone live in New York in this universe? Oh my goodness. Comes to aliens coming out of the sky, catching strays from Spider-Man villains, being sucked into this weird shadow universe from the void from Thunderbolts, or even, random stuff like a giant one-eyed monster from Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. People living in New York City is just beyond crazy, and now you can add a getting mentally, mind effed by a mutant to that list as well. So that was weird. But anyways, going back to the Punisher thing. So bringing Spider-Man to the hospital, when it cut and showed that Spider-Man with his mask off and the Punisher just sleeping, for God knows how long, I just thought that was just beyond ridiculous. For one, having Spider-Man with the mask off and doctors attending to him, I know the world's forgotten about Peter Parker. Maybe there's not a whole lot of history of him and stuff like that currently in that world. But still, though, having just a flat-out mask off and doctors attending to him was just crazy. But even crazier to me, whatever. People in this New York you see love Spider-Man. But even crazier was having the Punisher just casually sitting there chilling was just insane. You gotta remember, the Punisher, even though anti-hero, but criminal as far as killing people, and we've seen that conflict that he had with the authorities and whatever in the Netflix shows and all that kind of thing. That's why he has to live as a hermit, because he is a criminal that's gone out and kills people, and he knows it. So the fact that he was able to just sit there in a hospital was just beyond crazy. That was just insanely bad writing to me. That made no sense. It just took me out of the movie. Now, there could be two things that explain this. Now, for one, based on what's shown in the movie, it could be, and Frank even said this to Peter when he said that Jean was using her voodoo witch stuff to keep him alive or whatever. But another thing that could have been done, and they could have explained this with one line in the movie, she was using her mental abilities to protect his identity and perhaps even keep anyone from, going at Frank, who was trying to watch over Peter. So that could have been something. That could have been an easy line to explain that, or maybe it's just supposed to be implied. But another thing that it could have been, this is something that was actually cut from the movie, which was Rosario Dawson's character from the Netflix Defender shows, where she played like a nurse that would end up helping the other heroes, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, all those guys she helped out. And apparently her scene was cut from this movie, where in the hospital she was going to be there helping out, Peter, protecting his identity, that kind of thing. Whether she had known Spider-Man previously or not, I don't know. Maybe Punisher apparently was going to team up with her, and she was going to help her keep his identity safe. Now, but this scene was obviously cut, but Rosario, at least based on a headline I saw, Rosario Dawson actually filmed this a scene. It would have been nice in kind of explaining that. It might have took some people out the movie who had not seen the Netflix series and be like, is that Rosario Dawson? That's kind of a small kind of role right there, or a weird role for her, but it's just kind of small and just kind of out of nowhere. It would have been another cool tie-in to those streaming Netflix series, that Defenders saga stuff and all that. And I love how that stuff has just made a resurgence with the Daredevil on Disney Plus, Punisher, and all that stuff. But they needed something to explain this, because this whole dynamic of Spider-Man in a hospital with no mask, and then the Punisher just sitting there not being arrested or anything, was just beyond insane. I think the easy thing would have been just to explain that Jean Grey was using her mental abilities to keep them safe, or maybe if you ever get the ultimate cut of this movie that'll include the Rosario Dawson thing, that would have helped out a lot too. But that was the final thing that I think just really took me out of the movie. I was like, that just makes no sense. And with no real explanation of it in the movie, I still, watching the movie a second time, really do not like that at all. So I thought that was crazy. So in terms of my final thoughts of the movie, I actually, based on how I felt about watching it the second time, I felt, my opinion, how I felt about it coming out the first time, I felt basically the same way, where I think this movie does some amazing Spider-Man stuff for a lot of the movie. I thought just the balance of the pure web-slinging fun and Peter's struggle, it was just so classic Spider-Man, and just that whole finally getting into a real friendly neighborhood aspect was really nice. I thought the pathos were great. The stuff with him and MJ, all of those major scenes, the scene on the rooftop or the scene where she confronts him about his identity, that stuff was just So good. I absolutely loved it. And then just some of the other stuff with the other heroes. His banter with the Punisher, fantastic. Fight with the Hulk, awesome. But the Jean Grey stuff, it just didn't do it for me in terms of a Spider-Man movie. Led to some issues, big issues I had with the third act. And again, that hospital stuff at the end really kind of took me out of the movie the first time I watched it, and I still don't like it the second time. Even though that thing with Frank wearing the Spider-Man mask, I mean, that is iconic. Sorry, that is iconic, fun stuff right there. That was just really funny. I absolutely loved that. That was just a great, and him doing the grunt that you see. Oh, that was good. That would be a fun costume to do. Just Punisher suit with a Spider-Man mask. That'll be iconic right there. So the movie was. I don't want to say it was a mixed bag because as a movie, I do think it's excellent. It's got great action, pathos. I do think your main thread, is something worthwhile in terms of a regular movie. But as a Spider-Man movie, I'm still just a bit disappointed by that villain aspect and some of the third act. I just thought it was weird, and it was almost too many things in this movie to juggle when it got to the end. I think the hands inclusion was probably the worst thing when it came to that whole stuff, man. You see what the hand was in the original streaming series on Netflix, the Defender Saga, and what it's reduced to here. I was like, why did you even bother utilizing that? That was just really out of place and just not good based on what had been seen from all of those guys before. So that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me at all. I didn't like that aspect. So as a movie, excellent. As a Spider-Man film, I just like it. And I think the reason why, even though there is a lot about this movie I absolutely love, I think the reason, forget about No Way Home to me is, I still think a better film. Definitely, I love No Way Home. It's one of my favorite MCU movies. But then comparing it to Homecoming and Far From Home, this is how I thought about it after watching the movie a second time. I think that this movie hits higher highs than Homecoming and Far From Home. Just those kind of great qualities I mentioned, the Spidey stuff, relationship stuff, pathos, Punisher, Hulk, all that stuff was great. But I think those other movies stay more consistent, meaning they don't have these deep dives of stuff that I really did not like the implementation of the hand, your villain stuff with Jean Grey, issues with the third act, that kind of thing. Those films are more just got a consistently more of a high, very enjoyable level. Where this movie just had some amazing, big time, whoa kind of things. But then just some stuff we're watching again, it's like, didn't quite do it for me. But I still enjoyed the movie very much. Had a great time watching it both times. I think for Spider-Man, it's just a really amazing showcase to show what a popular character the guy and just an impact he has on everyone, the merchandise, how people felt about the movies, and how people love this version of Spider-Man. Tom Holland's been playing Spider-Man for 10 years now. It's amazing how we've seen him grow up to where even though he still feels like a young Spider-Man, you compare this to how he looked in, his first appearance in Civil War. It's amazing to see how he's grown. So that stuff is just incredible. And I think, and how this movie ended was just really nice with the handshake being used to jog Ned's memory, and how it kind of implied that MJ maybe does have some memories of Peter in there with holding on to the not Netflix, holding on to the necklace and just kind of being in the same spot they used to go to, that kind of thing. So that stuff, it teases, it's a relationship. I'm really engaged in just the drama. That's the great thing about Spider-Man, is that you're equally as engaged with the, your villains, what they're going to do, all that kind of stuff, but then just the drama. It's the great thing about Spider-Man in all media. You're equally as engaged in the regular Peter Parker relationship stuff as you are, of course, your big villain showcase and all that. Which, in terms of what villains can be used for the next films, again, I think kind of an issue is that now, Sony and Marvel, they've had this philosophy of not using a different Spider-Man villain in all the movies. The problem is you've kind of run through a lot of your main classic ones. You've gone through Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Sandman, Venom, who I don't consider, he's not like a Stan Lee classic, but he might as well be a classic in that kind of bunch. You've got the Lizard, they've used Electro, they've used Vulture, they've used Mysterio. You had basically a Sinister Six in No Way Home. It doesn't leave you a whole lot of stuff to do here, and they wasted Kraven on that damn movie, and then you just got a little bit of Scorpion in this one. I think what I would love to see full-on appearance from Kingpin. Having Kingpin is basically, I know he's considered more of a Daredevil villain, but he's almost equally Spider-Man and Daredevil. And I think it would just be amazing to see just a confrontation between those two. I don't know if a real fight would work between those two in this universe, but just have Kingpin be really present for a Spider-Man movie, especially if we're still going to be on this kind of more friendly neighborhood level. As far as anyone else, I think the last one it's not really a classic villain, but a modern day one that's kind of risen in popularity, especially because of the video game, was Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative was actually in the original Brand New Day series of the comics that this title is and the movie's somewhat plot premise is based on in the general kind of sense. So I thought we might see him. We haven't seen him yet. I don't know if they want to save him for a live action Miles Morales movie or whatever. But Mr. Negative was one, so Kingpin, Mr. Negative. But besides that, I mean, you're really going to have to, you might have to, I do think you might have to go and try to get some Green Goblin action, or maybe if not Green Goblin, Hobgoblin. That would be cool. You don't have to make it Ned, but maybe make it, if you know the history of the Hobgoblin, base it on that story direction from the comics. Just something, you can't I don't want to see another thing where they kind of go in this wildly what the hell is this kind of direction, even though for a movie it'd lead to some good stuff. But for Spider-Man, I want to see more classic villains and that kind of stuff. But this movie, you definitely want to be definitely still exciting for the future of Spider-Man in film. These things are an absolute mega event. I do think this movie will end up being the highest grossing film of the year, because I think Doomsday, even though you would think that would be bigger, because it has to go up straight up against Dune Part 3, I think that's where that movie is going to run into some, not trouble as far as making a lot of money if it's a good movie, which I think it will be. But as far as just, having that kind of competition, he's not going to be able to make as much as Spider-Man. But the money Spider-Man is making, just absolutely incredible, and I'm happy it is, because I love Spider-Man. I love the event that this movie is, and I can't wait to see more. So those are my spoiler reviews for the film. I kind of stand by what I gave in the original review, which is excellent movie, but as a Spider-Man movie film, I liked it. And I actually, even though it was dangerous to do my ranking video after seeing the movie one time and thinking about the movie, I would still have it after watching a second time. I would still have it where I have it ranked in that video, which is in terms of my ranking for go number 1, Spider-Man 2, number 2, No Way Home, 3, Into the Spider-Verse, 4, Across the Spider-Verse, 5, the original Spider-Man film, 6, Far From Home, 7, No Way Home, 8, Brand New Day, 9, The Amazing Spider. Well, then there's a big drop off. Then 9, The Amazing Spider-Man 3, 10, Spider-Man 3, and 11, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So those are all those off the top of my head, not counting your crappy Sonyverse villain movies. Anyway, that's enough rambling for this spoiler review, this discussion on Spider-Man Brand New Day. If you made it to the end of this video somehow, thank you for watching.
I miss you, mate.